Hi, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is Nadia Oseguera-Ramón. I am joined by Geraldine De Silva, my co-host. We have an incredible topic today. We already have questions in the chat for our panelists, so we know it's going to be a good talk today. So we're going to forego some of the regularly scheduled programming, and we are going to actually jump right into something very exciting, the March grant winners. Um, Before I pass it over to Amber with the Maddie's Fund team, I do want to encourage other folks to please drop any national updates that you have in the chat, since we will not have time for our usual national updates. So Amber, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited about the call today. So what I'm going to do now is announce our grant winners for the community conversations and for the grants through Maddie's Pet Forum. Unfortunately, today we don't have time to highlight the winners and usually we let them give a little bit of a spiel about what they do, but we'd love for if any of the winners are on the call for them to go ahead and say hi in the chat and just let us know a little bit about what they do so we can hear their great work. But without further ado, we're going to add a little joy to your day and announce the winners. So for 2025 March, we have our weekly community conversations, 2 winners of 2,500 each. And they are Kay Fellows from Dear Old Geezers in Burlington, Texas, and Rachel Shields from Handicap Pet Foundations in New Hampshire. So congratulations to our Community Conversations winners of 2,500 each. And if you're on the call, please say hi in the chat. All right, next prize is our Maddie's Pet Forum monthly giveaway of $3,000. And that winner is David Diaz from Santa Barbara Animal County Services in California. So congratulations, David. We have our Maddie's Pet Forum quarterly giveaway of $1,000. And that lucky winner is Alyssa Rodriguez from Cat Guardians TNR Rescue in Salinas, California. So congratulations, Alyssa and the Cat Guardians. And last but certainly not least, we have our 30th anniversary $1,000 Cuddly Prize Pack giveaway. And that is going to Shelby Schultz from the Kentucky Humane Society in Louisville, Kentucky. Congratulations, everyone. Irene is going to drop a link in the chat. So if you want to join us for the community conversations and be eligible for the giveaway and compete on Maddie's Pet Forum for the other prizes as well, Irene will send you that information. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, looking forward to the call.
Thanks so much, Amber. And I think with that, we're ready to kick us off. We've got a topic that is of great interest to everyone in our industry. And today we are going to be talking about integrating social work and social workers into our sector in animal welfare. And we have a great set of panelists today, including Dylan from Canada. And the rest of our panelists are right here from the US. So we're going to start off with our first question today, which is to all of the panelists. And if you could tell us about your own experience and what brought you into this work. And also, how do your experiences inform your current role and the programs that you offer?
I can go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis. I am the director of social work at Austin Pets Alive. And I think for me, what brought me to this work was my background in social work is in forensics and mentorship. And so for me, working at an animal welfare organization was initially, I think, an opportunity to find joy in social work again, right? Being interested in kind of seeing what this work could do for the community and trying to figure out how we can sort of bridge the gap between social work and animal welfare. there are a bunch of us doing this work, but it's still something that's very new to the field. And so just thinking about how we can kind of bridge those gaps was something that was really interesting to me. And I carry that with me in my work at Austin Pets Alive. My experience in mentoring helped create our humane education program, the Pet Pals program, where we work with at-risk youth to teach them about career opportunities in animal welfare. And through beyond that, I would say that I think what I bring is just a moment of recognition and opportunities to find empathy and support for our community, both in the shelter and outside of the shelter. And yeah, I think that's it.
I can jump in. Thanks. I was going to say that I came to veterinary social work through a non-traditional path, but I think most of us have. I spent about 15 years working in shelters for individuals, for humans that are experiencing homelessness, and much of that time was particularly with survivors of gender-based violence. And through that work, what I witnessed often was impossible choices people had to make between their own safety and the well-being of their animals. Animals provided comfort and joy and meaning. And so, seeing that bond and what would interrupt that bond was really distressing for individuals that had experienced so much loss. So that experience combined with my own lifelong connection to animals, I think shaped my understanding of how deeply interconnected humans and animals and the mutual well-being really is. I've been at Toronto Humane Society for about 5 years. I'm the director of social work at the Humane Society. And I think, most of our program integration and creation has really tried to reflect the importance of the connection between humans and animals, really, and sort of looking at how can we bring that human lens, pardon me, what are the barriers that humans and families are experiencing in providing care to their animals? So, everything from our pet safekeeping program to pet loss and bereavement program. We have a hands-on training specifically designed for drop-in and human shelter workers that are looking towards or are supporting co-sheltering work. And we also have an academic internship program that trains future social work students to work at the intersection. So every program is really grounded in the belief that animal well-being, animal welfare really is human well-being. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name's Raquel. I'm also really excited to be here. I am the veterinary social worker over at the Friends of Alameda Animal Shelter in the Bay Area in California. I came into this work, my background is in mental health crisis work. So I was providing human mental health services before coming into animal welfare. And in that work, I was really supporting a lot of folks with suicidal ideation and clearly people in crisis. And something that I found was super interesting in that work is that folks with pets just had more protective factors around suicidality. Folks usually didn't have a plan compared to folks who were experiencing suicidality, who didn't have a pet at home. And so that sort of protective factor was really interesting for me because the medicine of animals was just a sort of like striking thing that stood out. And I learned about Pause LA was the first organization that I learned of that really sort of bridged animal welfare and human welfare. And so when I moved to the Bay Area, I really started working in sheltering to sort of understand that deeper connection between mental health and having an animal. And when I started working in animal welfare, I realized how much easier it was to talk to folks about some of the financial barriers and things going on in their lives when we were really talking about their pets first. And so through that work, I think that it is easier to have sometimes these community collaboration even events when you're going out and working with people in the community around social welfare issues like getting connected to healthcare or mental health resources when you're also talking about, so tell me about your cat, tell me about your dog. And so I think that there's a lot of overlap there. I think there's a lot of potential in, you know, building a relationship with people when you're talking about pets. And I realized it's a place that I really have a lot of joy and respect for, this sort of field that we're in, this niche of animal welfare and human welfare. Before I got into social work, I was really working as an activist and community organizer. So my lens is really using racial justice, gender justice, and economic justice to frame the way I believe we can work in community in a powerful way. And I'm excited that more and more shelters and more people in animal welfare are looking at how to bring social work into the fold. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Monica's just joined us. And I don't know whether you heard the question we asked the panelists, Monica, but really like our opening question was about like what actually drew you and brought you into this work, and how does your role sort of inform the programs that you offer? We
Monica,
can't hear
can
you.
you unmute? Can Monica unmute?
She is unmuted. It just seems like we can't hear you for some reason, Monica.
Her microphone
Can
is
you
open.
try
You can
speaking?
log out and log back in again, and that might help.
Can we just give it a moment? Monica, if you click on the little arrow next to your microphone, just ensure that it's same as system. You might want to try that. Might be easier than getting out and getting back in. Well, it would not be a Zoom meeting if we didn't have any audio issues, right? So while we're getting this figured out, we'll keep the discussion moving, and then we'll make space for Monica to introduce herself as well. Please bear with us. I do want to say Monica was just on another panel, so we appreciate her making the time to be here today too. So let's actually dive into our second question. How can animal welfare organizations reframe their messaging to move away from this narrative that we have these sad shelters and instead focusing on being community-centered resource hubs or just being a part of the community? Who would like to start?
I can jump in. I think, sort of the sad shelter story sometimes pulls at heartstrings, right? I mean, I think it was, an intended narrative, but it really reinforces stigma. It really reinforces discriminatory actions and oppressive systems. And so it positions shelters as a place of last resort rather than a community partner. So one of the things that we talk about at Toronto Humane Society is not that we are an adjunct to our community, but rather, in fact, we are a social service organization, just as any other social service organization is in our community. We just happen to have expertise related to animals, right? So, there might be housing social service organizations, and they have expertise and knowledge and resources related to housing. And so ours just happens to be related to animals. So the idea of really reframing what we are and what our mission is and what our values are and how we move towards improving the welfare and the well-being of animals is really looking at the narratives that we've created, right? Have we created a narrative of vilifying individuals, or are we looking at sort of creating having awareness around the systems that are getting in the way of humans and animals, having a mutually healthy relationship and opportunity to benefit from the dynamic that exists between, right? So really thinking about ourselves as prevention focused, as solution driven, and being embedded in the fabrics of our community, I think is a lot of the work that we've done at Toronto Humane Society. And our community has really embraced this idea, right? So we're really looking at telling stories and sharing stories that centers people's resilience, the love that people have for their animals, how they go to the ends of the earth to access services, right? And that this really makes all the difference, and that we are really honored to be able to join with them. To partner with families in caring for their animals, right? So we're showcasing community works, fostering programs, pet food banks, and really thinking about the concepts of harm reduction work and how we can continue to participate in that, in all of the ways that we are actually keeping animals with the people that love them, not apart from them. So I think that that's sort of some of the narrative switch that has been really critical and important for us to make. And a lot of that work has required us to really look at animal welfare industry in general and look at the history, right? Look at how colonialism has played a part in the narratives that we've created, right? The ideals that we've created, in terms of what does animal husbandry look like? What does that influence? How have our policies really separated us from community? And so we've had to do a lot of digging to really look at why do we operate the way that we do, and what is our mission, and sort of really be reevaluating that to center that we are an adjunct to community knows what they need, and really ensuring that empowered voices and knowledge keepers are the ones that are telling us what services they want and that they need.
Thank you for that. Alexis and Raquel, Monica, we'll have you introduce yourself in just a moment. Yeah, what thoughts do y'all have?
I think Dylan sort of articulated that perfectly, but what I will add is that we are reminded every day that communities know what they want and know what they need. And when given the opportunities, they will always tell us. And when they tell us what we need, we provide them with the services, and everything works better when we're working in conjunction with community. I think when we think about the sad narrative, I think it almost tells us exactly that, right? If this is such a sad narrative, that's exactly why we should be working with community, and working to help create opportunities for diversion, right? To help animals not end up in the shelter, to not break up these family units, right? We know that families and people look at animals as members of their family, and there's no reason why we shouldn't support that way of thinking for them.
I agree. I agree with everything Alexis and Dylan are saying. And I also think that I think we can face what's sad about sheltering head on too. And I think that that is the value of social workers. Because I think if we sort of unpack what's sad about sheltering, then we can sort of look at, well, what are the skill sets that we have already to address those things? And I think a lot of things that people think about when they think of sheltering as sad are things like humane euthanasia. And there are reasons people have to surrender their pets, even when we have all of the resources to help folks, like financial veterinary assistance or even housing suggestions or help with getting an emotional support letter for your animal. There are legitimate reasons people have to surrender their pets that are heartbreaking. And I think that social workers can support people in grief and in death. And I think one of the things that I bring that I meant to say earlier is this belief that we can do a little bit of grief work and death work every single day to really center ourselves in the power and beauty of the present moment and of life. And I think that something that I think is so powerful about animal welfare is that we can really be experts in grief and loss and supporting our community and our staff through the emotions that are really painful in saying goodbye. And that we can see ourselves as resilient, and we can see ourselves as people who can grow and care for each other. So this is something that I think is talked about less, but I think it's a growing edge for us, and I think that we can all do more in that area of grief and loss.
Thank you, Raquel. Beautifully said. Monica, if you can please introduce yourself briefly, and then also answer the question that we're talking about right now, which is how do we shift from the traditional, sad shelter narrative to more of a community-centric focus?
Hi, everybody again. Sorry about that earlier, but thank you. So I am the community support manager at WAG's Pet Adoption in Westchester, California. My background is in mental health. I am a licensed marriage family therapist in the state of California. So that is my experience. This is my first time working in animal welfare. So it's actually really awesome to see that, like, in animal welfare, that we are bridging that gap of human welfare and animal welfare, because it's a need, and giving back to the community as well. I am bilingual, so I'm Vietnamese American. I provide on-the-spot translation to our community members, also engaging in partnership and collaborating with and outreaching with community organizations that can help bridge that gap that we have, such as pet food pantries that I facilitate once a month. I've gone on ride-alongs with animal control to support them and provide translation, and also if needed, and also just to be there and support so that community members don't feel like they're being policed or something's happening, because there's also that fear. So that kind of it goes into that fear or scared feel about what that stigma is about animal welfare. And again, Raquel, thank you for sharing the about grief, because grief does impact a lot of and based on my experience, I do provide biweekly grief support groups to our volunteers and staff, as well as any community members if they need it when they do come in. So seeing that has been helpful for them to just kind of like have a safe space without any judgment, so that they could just process anything that they just need to talk about. If it's not even grief, if it's stress, compassion fatigue, it's like working in crisis and having that trauma-informed approach perspective does help in this. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. So you kind of already started touching on mutual support, mutual aid. This next question says, what does it mean to take a mutual aid approach in animal welfare, and how can this framework support both animal and human care? And I'd like to, Raquel, if you can actually kick us off with this one, since I know that that's the work that you do at the shelter. So please.
Thank you. So I saw something the other day that really resonated with me. This idea that there's, in the absence of justice, there's charity. And I think what mutual aid offers is not
Now I can't get the speaker to work. Oh.
Excuse me, can you all please mute yourselves? Thank you. Sorry, Raquel.
I thought I couldn't be heard. Okay.
Well,
And so I think from a mutual aid perspective, it's important that we're looking at ways that we can provide low barrier to no barrier support for our community, because we believe that there is that being in crisis isn't an individual failing. It is a systemic failing. And the reason that people don't have access to adequate and equal veterinary care, food services for their pet, is because there are systemic barriers that prohibit people from really getting the care that they need for themselves and also for their pets. And so because we believe in that, we believe in providing low barrier
I can't get any action.
so that we can't necessarily level the playing field, but we can offer it in a no judgment, kind of sort of safe, community supportive way. And so I've heard the majority of other folks say they offer these things, but we offer a pet food pantry. I also want to shift our language from pet food pantry to a food bank, something that's, you know, it just sounds like it's something that's more, available for folks to access, from less of like sort of a scarcity mindset and something that's like just something set up for people to access regularly. We also provide on-site food to folks in the community. We have if folks want to come also outside of our pantry hours for support, then we will meet folks where they're at. We don't have restrictions. And this isn't something that we just started. It's been a journey to shift from having fewer and fewer barriers, because we're shifting the mindset of people that who've been working with us and volunteering with us, that it's important to reduce the amount of barriers. So this is about building conversations and relationships with our staff, our leadership, and also our volunteers about why mutual aid is important and why we want to sort of restrict or sort of take down these barriers of access to care. We don't have requirements for location or address or proof of income. So I'll leave it there for other folks to answer.
Thank you so much. I also appreciate you laying down the foundation of what mutual aid is and why it exists. Really appreciate that. Dylan, Alexis, or Monica, would you like to add anything?
I can add, Raquel, thank you so much for sharing that quote. I actually wrote that down as you were speaking, because I think that's going to be sort of a gift that I continue to share with myself mostly, but with others when given the opportunity. I think it's really profound. And what it really highlighted for me is this concept of mutual aid really is rooted in solidarity, right? It's not the idea of charity. In the animal welfare sector, a lot of what we've gotten caught up in is this idea of rescuing others. And I think this is something that social work can really offer. We've had many decades in our profession of moving away from a rescue ideology and moving to an empowerment ideology, and recognizing that people are the experts of their lives. They know what it is that they need. And we, as I think Raquel had said, or Alexis perhaps had indicated, it's just opening up that conversation for how can we help? And then people will give us those answers, right? And so it's then our job and our responsibility to make sure that we're building systems that are based on undoing a lot of the, we have to undo a lot of the perpetual harms that we've done. And so recognizing that, moving away from this idea of rescuing is really critical, because we are offering resources. We're not gatekeeping resources, right? We're not coming, people aren't coming to us to receive judgment. They're coming to us genuinely looking for the opportunity to engage with the resources that we are so blessed to have access to. So I think just sort of, when you were talking, Raquel, those are some of the thoughts that came up for me. So really thinking about like building reciprocal systems of care. And that's where I think that social work lens comes from, because that's where what all of our training is in, right? Our profession has had, as I said, decades or hundreds, I don't know, however old our profession is, but being able to do things maybe well-intentioned, but having real dire impacts. And we're working at unlearning those things so we can bring some of those practices, those policies, and some of that wisdom and evidence-based practices, right, to the animal welfare sector.
Alexis, Monica.
To piggyback on that. And Raquel, that was great. Very well said. And I would also agree with where you guys are approaching with mutual aid. Yes, it is approach to recognize like interconnectedness of care and involve sharing resources for mutual benefits. And it's also like, providing that collective support and research sharing. I think another to collaborate with that is working with diverse organizations and offering bilingual resources also is another mutual aid, right? Creating a network of shared support that we can ensure both humans and animals can, thrive together, live together. And that is in itself can also help with what we provide as in social work or mental health professionals in that lens. Evidence-based practice, what we have seen, triage or outreach, collaborations, community connectedness, fostering those kind of volunteer programs that, from my experience, providing that volunteer programs by the grief support groups that we have, the ride-alongs I go along with animal control. And I also, collaborate with homeless shelters, bridging that gap too with individuals that live at, resides at homeless shelters that have pets, collaborate that in that human care.
Yeah, thank you. Alexis, would you like to add anything?
I think I'll just add that I think that what I took from what Raquel was saying too was like this reminder that as a woman of color in this field and in the social work field, right, what that means to communities when they see people who look like them reflected back at them, and how we need to continue to diversify the field so that people in the community see that reflected back at them, so that they see that they can build, there's some inherent trust and relationship building there when they see people that look like them, people that speak their language, people that understand that cultural competence is so important as we kind of move forward and move away from what Dylan was talking about that saviorism and all those harmful sort of things that we need to unlearn.
Fantastic. I think this is a great segue to the next question because you're already talking about how social workers are helping change the narrative and giving a new perspective to our sector. So the next question is, how can social workers help bridge the silos within animal welfare organizations, particularly when dealing with trauma and grief in staff and in the community? Anyone can go.
Geraldine, could you repeat the question? You broke out a little on my end.
I'm sorry about that. So this question is about how social workers can break the silos, can bridge the silos within the animal welfare sector, particularly when dealing with trauma and grief with staff and within the community.
I can kick us off. I think that specifically when we're dealing with trauma and burnout and compassion fatigue and a bunch of other really problematic issues that are inherently involved in animal welfare, I think what we bring as social workers is that recognition of it, right? I think we are trained in recognizing the signs, being able to show empathy, being able to support folks in a space that allows them to show up as their full selves. And also we're taught in the skills of how to communicate that in a way that people still feel held, right? That they feel supported and feel like they can come back and ask more questions.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're really primed as social workers to be thinking about all of the different factors that contribute to how somebody's showing up in front of you. And here's just another plug for Dean Spade. Dean Spade came out with another book recently, really about how we love and make connections in our community. And when things are really hard and really painful, it's important to ask the question, what else is true in this situation? And I think that that's what social workers do. I think if somebody is assuming that a pet has come in and is in difficult shape, then what our trauma brain might say is, oh, this animal was abused or wasn't being taken care of. And what, somebody who's maybe done some work around their own responses can do is say, okay, what else could be true here? And what are all of the psychosocial factors that have brought this pet and this person in today? And we come at that with compassion and tools and evidence-based practices like Dylan was talking about. And we just have the vantage point of some training and and hopefully some of the work that we're also always doing with ourselves, being sort of in therapy and or utilizing some of our own like cultural ancestral practices. I know that's been really important for me. So to sort of carry us through in a day when things are difficult. So hopefully it's really hard. I just will say it's really hard as the social worker. And if there's only one in an organization, to be the one that is culturally changing an entire shelter to have an awareness about compassion fatigue. So I think that also a social worker with skills on like presentation and doing workshops so that we can really diversify the skills set of people in the organization, not be the only one holding everybody's wish to debrief trauma. I think that's also really important. So I'll say that there.
I think one other small point that I would add just very quickly is a lot of the work that we do as social workers is to work on all systems levels. So our brains are primed to look at what we would describe as sort of the direct practice or the micro sort of level, but we also sort of scale back out and we're looking at sort of that meso level and then the macro level. So a lot of the work that we'll do as social workers might be that, let's say, grief bereavement work or quality of life assessment work or staff well-being work, but it might also be looking sort of up the river, right? What's happening at different levels to contribute to the presentation, the trends, the difficulties that we're seeing in community. And so when we're talking about sort of bridging silos, that is inherently the work that we do as social workers is about, I think, Raquel, I think you mentioned it, is we act as connectors, right? So whether that's internal in our organizations is we do interdisciplinary work. That's the only way we do our work. I would say I don't think that there's one program, initiative, or service that I run that doesn't engage all of the other professions in my organization. There is not an exclusive social work program. It is all about that integration and making sure that disciplines are working together. But beyond that, it is also those external services, right? So we're primed to sit on other committees, human service committees, networks. We're primed to do policy work, advocacy work, presentations, as Raquel said, right? So we're looking at human needs, we're looking at family needs, we're looking at community needs, and we're also looking at that larger scale picture. And the way that we do that with humans is not different than the way that we do that with, trans species families. So I think that would be just sort of the other ad that I would have. But I think the other part that my colleagues have so eloquently said is really inviting those hard conversations around power and inequity and sustainability. Because at the end of the day, we all need to be sustainable too, right? So how do we weave together those bits? Because we're all working on limited budgets. And I think, as we sort of go into next questions, I think it was David had a question about funding and things of that matter. It's really important that we get into some of that as well, because it isn't just a nicety to have a social worker, but it is actually financially beneficial to do so, right? And you can get the returns that you need, which are improvements in animal well-being and improvements in your community and things of that nature.
Monica, did you want to add anything before we move to the next question?
No, I think I share based on everybody shared wonderfully. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So our next question is, in what ways can animal welfare organizations prioritize staff wellness to prevent burnout? And that includes the four of you sitting here. So who would like to go first?
I can
Take that one.
Okay, go
Um,
ahead.
I think organizations should really be utilizing employee assistance programs. Usually they're set up through HR, because that provides a bunch of benefits that are free to staff, that staff can utilize at will, right, when they need them. I think us as social workers, we have the ability to train staff and also point out to staff when we need to recognize and recognize the signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue, of burnout, of possibly a mental health crisis, things like that. And I think that what we can also focus more on is structural boundaries that create space for people to take care of themselves and how we can show up and support them, especially staff. An example of that, like really small things, could be just making sure that all our staff take lunch breaks, right? It could be something like making sure that maybe if there's one or two particular staff members that are working late pretty consistently, right? What are we doing to kind of make up for that time in other ways to make sure that they get the benefit of rest, that they are able to turn off from the work? Something that we provide at APA is one-on-one staff check-ins with not only staff, but also volunteers when they are feeling overwhelmed. That could involve some personal things that might be going on, but also things within the workplace, right? Did they witness a euthanasia that occurred with an animal that they were close friends with? Did they support a community member whose ongoing issues were particularly heavy in that moment, right? How do we then turn around and kind of support them is a really is an ongoing question that organizations need to be asking themselves, so that way we continue to not burn out our staff, and so that it makes the work sustainable for people. Because what I don't think a lot of people recognize is how much trauma goes into the everyday work of being an animal welfare professional. And I think for years it's been tossed up into like, that's just the way the work is, right? That's how it is. But it does not have to be that way. It does not. I firmly believe that. And I think that if we want to continue to maintain staff that have that institutional knowledge and continue to grow in organizations and have people move up in our respective organizations, we have to take care of them. We have to take care of them. And a lot of that work is structural.
I agree with what Alexa's saying, is providing that, focusing on intentional and combined support and strategies, practical solutions and strategies to help staff, volunteers, and yeah, absolutely. Animal sheltering is like it's very hard. And they're day in, day out, I see, on site like crisis or dealing with multiple things that they have to juggle. And just me checking in on them one-on-one, just asking them just a simple question: how are you guys doing? Or how are you doing? Sometimes it kind of shifts their like focus in that work mode to like, wow, okay, somebody is actually saying, asking me how I'm doing, and it could shift that. And it's just kind of like fostering that more of like support in like taking time off. Mental health day, I always encourage like, take time off. That work-life balance is very important too. Even though sometimes it's that feeling of like, no, I feel like I'm letting my team down if I call up sick or something, whatnot. But it's like, the work is going to be there if you leave. The work's going to be there when you come back. It's more of like, you got to take care of yourself first so you could be there for other people and for the pets. And so fostering more of that nurturing emotional well-being to staff and volunteers, I think that would help.
I love what you both have said. I think it's so pivotal for just even the platform of repeated exposure to suffering changes us, right? None of us come into this work, none of you come into this work for this reason, right? Is to be changed in a particular, let's say, maladaptive way or negative way, but that happens when our systems are not supportive of psychological health and safety, right? And so, we can't individualize responsibility for surviving trauma. It is systems, right? And our systems have to work together, whether that is creating space from the top, right? Trauma-informed leadership and recognizing that we're existing in a space because of systems failures. So by nature, the work is going to have negative impacts, right? When the puppies are born and they fly off the shelves, like, yeah, that's a great day. But when we're working with some of our animals that have longer term behavioral issues, or we're working with our animals that are engaged in our forensic teams or things of that nature, right? We're sort of exposed to the subset of the population of animals that things are not going well for them, right? And so I think just sort of, social work has the opportunity to be able to assist leadership in being able to create, let's say, resources in a way that isn't going to be, again, taxing, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to figure out how to be we are a value add, but how do we also make sure that we're not taking when you're on shoestring budgets, but seeing it as an investment in your staff, as an investment in sustainability and reduced, medical mistakes or things of that nature, right? That there is those elements that when we think about self-care being essential, it's not just self-care being put onto the person, but looking at our systems in the way that we can continue to foster really psychological health and safety. Those two things really need to coincide together.
Raquel, would you like to add anything before we move on?
I think what I have to say might also lead into the next part, but I think that looking at the folks who sort of the pay structure of our organizations, I think is really important when we're thinking about caring for our staff and thinking about burnout, that burnout is usually not an individual failure either. It's a systemic issue. And how do we really take self-care out of this sort of like luxury mindset and think about it as like what actually sustains my life, and part of that is income. And so if we're looking at animal welfare, I think we used to think, people of color aren't in animal welfare. It's not that, it's that people of color might not be in leadership positions, or poor people might not be in leadership positions in animal welfare. And so if we're thinking about also creating agencies that reflect the communities that we're working, so that we're building really important relationships, we're thinking about also where are the people of color in our organizations, and is it a sustainable place for all folks to be? And if we're sort of looking at the most dangerous roles, or the roles where you're going to get injured the most, where you might need time off, where you might need where you're going to be the closest to animals, and then also being the closest, saying goodbye to those animals might have a deeper impact on the folks who are caring for the animals the most. I think we really need to look at, are those positions, do they get benefits? Are folks getting paid, above minimum wage? Are folks able to go home and take care of themselves with the resources that we're giving folks? So I think that we really need to look there as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know that we're almost out of time, but I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question, because it kind of speaks to what we were just talking about. And so how can leadership have a role in making some transformative changes, and what sort of action steps do you recommend, real quickly? One.
I would say that we need to consider bias training, both implicit and explicit bias training, thinking about how other mandatory trainings really should be kind of built into the structure of the review process, right? Like, how are we creating spaces for people to talk about how they kind of work through some of the issues that they might encounter. Similar to what Raquel said, diversifying our leadership, and ensuring that our staff are representative of the community that we serve.
And that includes language. I really believe in language justice as a concept that we can all sort of maybe look more into. I think having community members and community members' children translating for some of these really difficult conversations that we might have around humane euthanasia, surrendering, even complicated medical situations is really not what language justice would, that's not what the approach would be. It would be, how can we have language resources available for having some of these harder conversations? And I think that allows the community members to really be freed up to have the experience of whatever is happening while we're providing sources, the resources. So I think, yeah, a lot of what Monica was saying around language access.
Thank you so much. We are right on time. I really wish we could keep this conversation going for hours, so we might have to have you back for a part 2. Everybody, please head to the Maddie's Pet Forum, where our panelists will continue to answer your questions and engage in conversation. Truly appreciate all of you, Alexis, Dylan, Raquel, Monica. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Really appreciate you, and take good care.
Thank you. Bye.